Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world. That is 1 John chapter 4, verse 1. So it is sad to say, but not everyone who claims to be a Christian is really a follower of Christ. Many are simply pursuing their own agendas, be it money, fame, or political influence. These false disciples come in many shapes and forms. But perhaps none is more dangerous as the spiritual narcissist. A spiritual narcissist is someone who uses the gospel to build themselves up while they tear others down. A spiritual narcissist is someone who uses the gospel to build themselves up while they tear others down. Let's signs that you may be dealing with a spiritual narcissist. Number one, they constantly reference their own achievements. That is, Scripture tells us not to seek our own glory and to let our work stand on its own. That is Proverbs chapter 27, verse 2. But the spiritual narcissist will flaunt anything they believe might bring them praise. The best way for Christians to counter this display is to follow the example of Micah chapter 6, verse 8. Live justly, show mercy, and walk humbly with the Lord your God. That you're dealing with a spiritual narcissist. They invade conversations. The spiritual narcissist craves control, and their highest authority is always their own self-reference. As a result, it's not uncommon for the spiritual narcissist to invade the personal or private conversations of others. They'll often do this under the guise of helping or correcting fellow Christians, but they have no real interest in two-way dialogue. You'll notice they also have a way of injecting their own opinions into situations. The Bible warns that such people create division among believers and serve only their own appetites. That is Romans chapter 16, verse 17 to 18, and Psalms chapter 36, verse 1 to 4. While the spiritual narcissist has much in common with your regular kind of narcissist, a spiritual narcissist tends to hold sway over more people. You can find a spiritual narcissist in just about any religion and denomination. Religion is often a big draw for narcissists. Spiritual authority is nebulous. Many people who claim to have it do not have it. But with enough bluster and authoritarian posturing, it can sure seem like others have spiritual authority. Pastors are not the only ones who often qualify as a spiritual narcissist. In the same way, a spiritual narcissist uses scripture as a tool for their purpose instead of God's. They approach the Bible with a closed mind, memorizing only a handful of useful verses that will justify their behavior. Anything else, particularly scripture that conflicts with their actions, gets ignored. Like the men of Jude chapter 1 verse 4, they should not be trusted. The best defense Christians have against this kind of faulty theology is to simply read the Bible. The more familiar we become with God's work, the more familiar we become with God. Perhaps the easiest way to identify a spiritual narcissist is to see if their works match their words. Many will claim they have nothing but love and compassion in their hearts for those they rebuke, but their actions prove otherwise. Matthew chapter 7 teaches us that we can judge a prophet by the fruit of his labors. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. So, what kind of harvest do they bring to God's table? Division, disdain, cruelty? Love is more than words. Love is actions. That's what separates the true Christian from the spiritual narcissist. Spiritual narcissists, they refuse to acknowledge their mistakes. No one likes admitting they were wrong. It is a humbling, and let's be honest, sometimes embarrassing experience. But accepting responsibility for your mistakes is the first step towards real maturity. Naturally, the spiritual narcissist will have none of it, even when confronted with insurmountable evidence. The spiritual narcissist will continue to defend their actions as right. For them, it's not about the greater good. It's about protecting their self-image. Humility is a precious gift. It allows us to learn from our mistakes, recognize our faults, and grow into better people because of it. Take some advice from Philippians chapter 3 verse 13. Accept what you've done wrong and strive to live for what Narcissists, they tear others down. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 11 says, therefore encourage one another and build each other up, just as in fact you're doing. A spiritual narcissist refers to do the opposite. They prefer to do the opposite. Rather than serving as a source of inspiration, the spiritual narcissist enjoys being a voice of derision. They are quick to criticize others for their perceived failings and frequently cause mischief by inflaming arguments amongst believers. In short, they build their sense of worth by tearing others down. Scripture tells us the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That is Galatians chapter 5 verse 22-23. A disciple of Jesus should be known for what they build, not for what they break. The spiritual narcissists, they ultimately put God second. An expert in the law once asked Jesus what the greatest commandment was. His reply was, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. That is Matthew chapter 22 verse 37-40. Now, many Christians know this verse by heart. But the meaning behind Christ's words goes much further than we realize. Not only is Jesus calling believers to love God with all their heart, he's telling them our faithfulness is affirmed by our love for our neighbors. To put it simply, we can only love God if we are unselfish. A spiritual narcissist will always put God second, whether it's by neglecting Christ's commands or how they treat their neighbors. Pride will always make a person spiritually toxic. So don't let yourself miss out on God's amazing plan by being a spiritual narcissist. Every spiritual narcissist is a braggart. Maybe let me clarify on that. I've never seen this rule controverted. How spiritual narcissists brag is a little different than other kinds of narcissists. One tactic is to do the humble brag. And that is, God has used me to do some fantastic things. It looks like they're glorifying God, but their actual motive is to make sure you know that God chose them to do unique things. God does choose some people to do incredible things. It is a matter of what the leader is really focused on. Another way a spiritual narcissist brags is numbers. How big the church is, how many churches they sponsor, how much money came in, and the list goes on. So the subtle issue here is competition. If the unspoken suggestion is that this church or pastor is more effective in the kingdom than others, this too is a boast. Lastly, they continuously reference their successes and projects. Self-promotion is a necessary evil when it comes to books and blogs. I've learned this the hard way, but if a person dominates every conversation with a list of their latest accomplishments, from mission trips to speaking tours, you may have a narcissist on your hands. Narcissists are always a little paranoid that they will be found out, but they are also on the lookout for information they can use. A spiritual narcissist will tease information out of a victim to use it at a later date. I've known people to confide in a pastor only to find out that the whole church is talking about their issue. It gets even creepier when strangers come up and announce that they're praying for you for such and such and such a thing, and yet you only told the pastor. So, another way a spiritual narcissist crosses a boundary is by calling a member out for an issue that is not an issue. I once visited a church where the pastor chastised those who did not fully tithe. He called them out on a microphone in a service. In another instance, a pastor inquired about the sex life of a woman whose husband took long business trips. So, if you feel uncomfortable about the conversations you have with any leader, beware. Believe your intuition. Spiritual narcissists select only those willing to always agree with them to be in their immediate circle. If you notice that everyone on the church board or all of the deacons are particularly weak individuals, be suspicious. They may be dedicated, they may be humble believers accomplishing beautiful acts of service, but if none of them ever disagree or question the leader, they are carefully chosen sheep. It is situations like this that allow churches to wander into illegal or immoral territory. If no one is able to question the policies or actions of the leader, then generally some moral issues will result. The issue always comes down to power. Who has it, and what are they doing with it? A church should not be a totalitarian regime, but rather a family with various roles to fill. If your pastor only hires submissive assistant pastors or those with significantly weaker personalities than he, your church may have a problem.